We are live. Hi guys, I'm Brian from SRC, and today we have a very special program for you with someone all the way from Israel, RedSea. But before we go on with the program, we're just going to wait 5 minutes for more people to tune in, and then we will start the program proper. So we're just waiting for more people to tune in before we start this program proper. Once again, we have a very special guest all the way from RedSea, Israel. So stay tuned. We're going to start our program shortly. Okay, just waiting for a few more people to tune in. Do stay tuned all the way to the end because we have a lot of prizes to give away as well. So make sure you listen in and stay tuned. But yes, let's just wait for a few more people to tune in. I think more and more people are tuning in. Some of you just finished your dinner. So yeah. Okay, we're gonna start our event proper right now. So for those of you who are online right now, please like and share the post, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube. Go and like and share, because if you like and share, maybe we'll give you more chances to win more prizes later. And you know, like and share, get more people to finish their dinner quickly and join us in this program, because we have very special guests. Okay, so we're gonna start proper right now. So I'm Brian. Hi, I'm Brian from SRC, and today, all the way from Israel, we have RedSea's chief scientist, Sharon Ram, who is here with us to share about his experience in reefing. Sharon was the person who started the whole RedSea care program, Coral Care Program, so RCP. Today he's here with us. We have this honor to have him here with us in SRC studio. To share with us more about water chemistry, coral nutrition, and any other reefing questions you have about this hobby. I know a lot of you out there have a lot of questions for him. So let me introduce him and let him introduce himself. Okay, Sharon, welcome to the stream. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Brian. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to introduce myself and introduce the RCP Reef Care Program by RedSea. I'll introduce a little bit of myself. Um, I work at RedSea for the last 17 years. I'm a keen hobbyist for the last 20 years. I have a master degree in marine biology and fish pathology, and hopefully this year I will finish my PhD, which focused mainly on coral biogeochemistry and the chemistry of the ocean. That's it. I'll introduce more about RedSea and the RCP in the lecture.
Okay. Okay, so Sharon, today, can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to cover today? Are you going to share with us about the RCP? Roughly, what are we going to cover today?
Okay, I will explain you in details the journey that I went during the development of the RCP. I will give you an introduction on all the biochemical and physiological processes that occur inside the corals. Okay. I will also explain a little bit about the interaction between corals and the environment and how it inflict on coral growth, coloration, how we can accelerate both this behavior if we want to accelerate the growth or if we want to accelerate coral pigmentation. I will also talk a little bit about nutrient control and how everything incorporate together. And eventually, I will discuss about trace element measurement and the usage of ICP, which become more and more popular these days. And I will explain a little bit of the drawbacks that uh, people may suffer when using an ICP test. Okay?
Okay, so it's got a lot to cover. So,
Yes.
Sharon, once again, let me welcome some of the new people who have just joined us. Hi, everyone. I'm Brian from SRC. With me here is all the way from Israel, RedSea's chief scientist, Sharon Ram. It's one of our rare opportunities that we can have a program together with him. Today, he's going to share with us a little bit about the RCP program, the Red Sea Care program, which was developed by him personally. So we're very honored, and he's going to start his lecture shortly. So before that, we also want to remind you to stay tuned all the way because there's a lot of Red Sea merchandise that's going to be given out today. So there's also going to be a lucky draw. So do stay tuned. And I'm really, really looking forward to your lecture right now, Sharon. So Sharon, I'm going to pass this time on to you.
Okay.
Help yourself.
So I'll share the screen.
Okay, and the screen is okay. Is
Okay.
your you can turn on your slides, and we have your slides up here.
Okay. You can see the slide.
Yes,
Yes.
we do.
Okay.
At any point in time, if any of you are facing any technical difficulty, you can't hear the sound or your image is not clear, do just feel free to put it into comments so we can fix it.
No
Okay, but right
problem.
now I leave you your time with Sharon.
Okay. So today lecture is going to be about the Red Sea Reef Care program. It's the program that I developed during between 2007 to 2010 when it was introduced to the market. So I'll give you a little bit about a little bit background about Red Sea philosophy in terms of development. What we are trying to do in Red Sea is to combine together the nature needs, put science into our methodology, and eventually create products that support our hobby. Um, we all the time trying to answer all of these aspects during the development of our products. Basically, what we're trying to do, we try to optimize all the biogeochemical processes that occur inside the corals and eventually it will accelerate the growth and the health of our corals in our aquarium. So some of the milestones during my journey at RedSea and the development of the RCP, it all started in 2005 when I just joined RedSea after finishing my master's degree in marine biology. Uh, I started to work a lot on coral physiology, chemistry, and environment. I started to grow corals as these tiny colonies from polyps, and I started to analyze their chemical composition of the soft tissue and the skeleton, and started to see the interaction between the coral and the seawater surrounding it. After 3 years, the preliminary 3 years of the development, I introduced both Red Sea salt formula. One is the Red Sea salt, which is close to the natural seawater with slightly elevated levels. And afterward, I introduced the Coral Pro, which is an enriched formula that significantly enhance coral calcification. At 2010, I finished the research covering the entire biogeochemistry of corals, understanding the incorporation of the trace element that actually build the soft tissue and the skeleton. And I managed to put everything into a program which I thought would be very easy and precise for the hobbies to follow and to actually success with growing SPS corals and enhancing their coloration. During 2016, we optimized the program, and instead of just approaching with an accelerated growth or coloration methods, we divided this methodology into 4 recipes, which we found more easier for most of the hobbyists to choose what they aim to have in their aquarium. So at the beginning, the first thing I had to do is to start and learn coral physiology and chemistry. I focused on the different compartment of corals, which was the soft tissue and the skeleton. These are totally different, have different elemental composition. As you know, the coral itself is the soft tissue. This is the colony of the polyps. And basically what it does, it secretes a skeleton that help the colony spread itself in the environment in a 3-dimension composition or 3-dimension structure that increase its surface area. So basically the soft tissue, it's the coral itself. I also started to learn all the interaction between the soft tissue, the skeleton, and the soft tissue and the water. Now, in order to understand what are coral demands, I try to put them in a Maslow pyramid. Maslow pyramid summarize all the requirements that any living creature needs. And you start with the basic. Before you can grow any creature, any animal, you need to provide them with the basic environmental condition. When we talk about corals, the basic condition that any coral need to achieve is the ability to keep a homeostasis, a stable environment. And the 2 factors that are important for corals are the salinity and the pH. Remember that coral grow in water, so there is all the time an interaction between the water composition and the liquid environment inside the coral cells. If there was a barrier of gas like air, it was much more difficult for the environment to affect the coral tissue itself. So inside the water, any slight changes in water chemistry has a direct effect on the coral itself. After we provide the coral the basic environmental condition, and we don't put him in any kind of stress, he can convert part of its energy to grow. Okay, you know that any creature that stays in a stress mode doesn't grow at all because he spent most of his energy just to keep himself alive. Now, when the coral can spend energy to grow, we can continue further. We can start to play with the nutrients and nutrition. As you know, coral harbor symbiotic algae that provides between 80 to 85% of its energetic demand. However, these algae also shade some of the coral pigments. And if we want to accelerate coral pigmentation, especially in SPS corals, we need to reduce a little bit the quantity of the zooxanthella and actually change the brownish color of the corals, which is because of the density of the zooxanthella. If we reduce the population, we start to see coral pigments better. And finally, when we manage to control the zooxanthella, we need to provide the coral with some trace elements which promotes the production of the chromoprotein, which are the pigments themselves. Okay, so as you see, there is a pyramid of achievement that we need to cover first before we progress. So before we go to the environmental condition, I would like to give you a short introduction to coral morphology and the biogeochemical processes that include calcification and the production of skeleton and the production of pigments. If we look at an SPS coral, look at the figure at the top. We have the skeleton and there is the soft tissue. Okay, here are the polyps and the connective tissue between them called the cenosurk. Now, the proportion between the skeleton and the soft tissue, as you can see, is that the soft tissue is between 5 to 7% of the total mass. Okay, so if you measure a gram of 1 gram of coral, of wet coral, you have only between 50 to 70 milligrams of soft tissue. Now, when we look inside the coral, the soft tissue itself, this is the seawater, we have a double layer of epithelial cells. And at the upper layer, we have the cells that harbor the zooxanthella, the symbiotic algae. Okay, this algae has very, very important role in coral physiology, which I will discuss in a minute, but they stay only in this tissue. Now, we know today that the coral can remove or extract the zooxanthella in some specific condition, which cause what we call coral bleaching, when the entire zooxanthella leave the tissue. Okay, and we know that it also capable of consuming back the algae into the tissue. This is one of the most sophisticated mechanism that we do not have the answer yet how it's actually done, because the algae itself is mainly a parasite. Okay, it enters into the coral cell and it can go out from the cell without damaging the coral cell itself. Now, in between, we have this gap or this volume of water that called the celenteron. It's the opening from the polyp mouth and it runs through the entire soft tissue. This is also a connective, like a connective tunnel, a net of tunnels that connect the entire colony. And if one polyp consumes dissolved organic matter, it can move it around the entire colony through this net of pipes. Below that, there is the aboral epithel. This is the cell tissue that are responsible for the secretion of the skeleton. Okay, and this layer, this is the skeleton. Now, I will very try to be very basic and give very simple explanation to coral calcification. Okay, this is not the entire process. It is much more complicated than what I'm going to show you, but it will give you, I think, enough explanation to think and try to understand what's behind the RCP, what I try to do. So if we look at this scheme, here is the seawater, and this is the double layer of the soft tissue and the coral skeleton. You see, this is the layer that harbor the zooxanthellae algae. Now, the entire idea of the calcification process is that the coral need to do two things. First of all, is to increase the pH. If the seawater are more or less at pH between 8 to 8.2, in order for new skeleton to precipitate, the coral need to increase the pH only to 8.6 to 8.9. What happens when the coral uh, uh, increase the pH? You know that when we increase the pH in seawater, calcium and bicarbonate are bound together to create the calcium carbonate crystal. In corals, the crystal is aragonite in most of the corals, but in other mineralization organism, they also create calcite. Okay. Now, the only thing that happens even in natural seawater, if you increase the pH, aragonites start to precipitate naturally. So this is the only thing that the corals need to do. So how the elements enter to this layer, to this gap, to this gap before they are able to precipitate. In the past, we thought that there were cells, pumps that all the time pump calcium, magnesium, strontium, and all the rest of the periodic table into this layer. However, we know today that the mechanism is much more simple, and the corals open gaps in the tissues, and seawaters enter directly to this calcifying gap. Now, there is another parameter which I wrote here. It is called omega, or the saturation states of the aragonite. Basically, what the omega means is how much calcium, free calcium, and free dissolved inorganic carbon in the forms of carbonate and bicarbonate are available compared to the amount of calcium carbonate. In natural seawater, the aragonite saturation state is 4.5. Inside the calcifying fluid gap, the coral increased the aragonite to somewhere between 10 to 15. So basically, it concentrates calcium and carbonate. Okay, and then he increased the pH, and aragonite start to precipitate naturally. This is the mechanism. Now, in order to do so, in order to increase the pH, okay, we need to remove all the hydrogen ions that start to accumulate, because in the seawater, in the natural pH of seawater, the major carbon molecule is bicarbonate. And when we convert calcium and two molecules of bicarbonate, we get calcium carbonate, we get CO2, and we get hydrogen. These two elements reduce the pH, so we need to remove them from this area to be able to increase the pH. So how the coral does it? First of all, we know that coral are photosynthetic creature. They have the zooxanthellae that all the time do photosynthesis. So with the energy from the light, the zooxanthellae start to do photosynthesis. So the CO2 from this area diffuse into an area with low CO2. Also, bicarbonate from the seawater are converted by the algae, okay? And the end product of this process is, first of all, oxygen for the tissue itself, and carbohydrate and glycerol compounds, which are used as energy to these pumps that pump out protons and CO2, and in terms push inside some calcium ion and maybe sodium and potassium. This is a quick brief on coral calcification. Now, there are two important things that you need to bear in mind, which I will discuss later. The zooxanthellae also consume bicarbonate, meaning that the process of photosynthesis reduce our alkalinity. Okay. The other thing is that this is highly energetic process. If we do not provide enough energy, okay, for the coral, okay, he will not be able to draw proton out from this gap, and the pH will be eventually similar to the pH of the seawater, and calcification will be reduced significantly. Okay? Now, the other physiological process that I will discuss is the formation of pigments. Corals have the ability to synthesize all the amino acids they need to build the chromoprotein, the pigments. They can synthesize from the carbohydrates. So basically, they do not need amino acids. They can synthesize all of them by themselves. And together with trace element, okay, they develop the pigments. They also need some carbon, nitrogen, and phosphate for this process. Now, why coral produce the pigments? The pigments are responsible for two things. One, they shed the zooxanthellae, okay, so they prevent the process of over photosynthesis and situation of photoinhibition. I remind you that the process of photosynthesis produces oxygen. It also produces oxygen radicals. And these are very, very aggressive molecules that can destroy the coral from inside. So if the coral is not able to remove these radicals and the zooxanthellae continue to photosynthesize all the time, it actually damaged the coral, and this is what happened during a bleach phenomenon. So part of the role of the pigments is to shade the zooxanthellae and reduce a little bit the photosynthesis. What it also does, because these are pigments, it take the entire spectrum that is coming from the sun and it convert it like a prism. Okay, the high energy short wavelength are moved to the zooxanthellae, to the photosynthetic system. Other shades, other wavelengths, the green, the yellow, and the red one eventually the pigment are excited and they emit the light with the color back. What it does, it also reduces the energy that the coral absorb, and it reduces the heat. You know that if you take light energy and you expose any surface to it, part of the energy, the light energy, is converted into heat. So the excessive amount of light, if it is not consumed by photosynthesis, will be converted to heat, and by emitting out the light as energy, as pigments, it reduces the heat stress of the corals. Okay? So after we learn a little bit about coral physiology, as I told you, the first thing for us at RedSea was to provide the optimal environment. Now, the question was, okay, which environment is the optimal? Is the natural environment that we see today is sufficient enough for corals, or do they prefer different conditions? Um, I had, the benefit to live near the Red Sea, so part of the time I was able to do a lot of research directly in the reef of the Red Sea and do a lot of tests comparing condition in the reef aquarium and in the natural environment in terms of light, salinity, pH, oxygen, and all that stuff. So my first question was, do I need to replicate natural seawater? And I started to check if there is, what is the definition of natural seawater. In geochemistry, we have today natural seawater standard. Okay, if you take any textbook and look for seawater composition, you'll see a list of elements and their concentration that replicates the condition in mid-Atlantic Ocean of water that were taken from 1 kilometer depth. Okay, this is the standard for natural seawater. Now the question is, okay, are there any photosynthetic corals in these conditions? Are these conditions are truly what our coral needs? Okay, and we know that water at the upper layer of the continent shelf at the top 150 meters are completely different in terms of some of the trace element, okay, because they are consumed by phytoplankton, they are consumed by foraminifera, they precipitate. There's a lot of difference between mid-ocean water and the surface area water. And I had to figure out which water are most suitable and optimal for coral growth. Now, let's look at the salinity. This is a major parameter that every one of us is measuring, okay? And it is important to understand that salinity is the summary of all the dissolved elements in the water. If the salinity change, all the other elements that compose the seawater and give the entire salinity change in the same proportion. Okay, now when we look at salinity in different areas, okay, you see, let's look at the equator region where most the corals are coming from. You see that the salinity range between 32 PSU, which is in the Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, and it can rise up to 40 PSU or 40 PPT, okay, at the Red Sea. And in both these regions, and also in the Arabic Sea and the Persian Gulf, where there are corals, they grow in higher salinity, and in lower salinity in the tropics, where a lot of floods are entering the water and reduce the salinity. So, if the coral can grow in both environment, which one is better for them? I couldn't answer this question at the beginning. Now, just to remind you that even 1 ppt change in salinity, it equals to 12 ppm change in the calcium, for example, and almost 36 ppm in magnesium. So when we compare 40 ppt to 21 ppt, the change in calcium could be between 50 to 60 ppm of calcium, which is very high change, and the corals can grow in both conditions. Um, Here you can see different calcium measurement around the world. The Mid-Atlantic, which is the natural seawater standard, is 421 ppm. If you look at the calcium concentration in the equator in the Pacific, it's about 428. Why is that? Because deep water that coming from the deep Pacific Ocean, okay, in the deep ocean, foraminifera that actually harbor all the calcium carbonate in the water are dissolved and the calcium returned back with upwelling. This is why you have much more calcium. When you look at the Red Sea, for example, because of the high salinity and the runoff of water from the desert, the calcium increased between 473 up to 490 ppm. Again, you see the fluctuation. Now let's look at the alkalinity, okay? Also varies between different oceans. If we look at the mid-ocean, if you take the natural seawater standard, the alkalinity, this is in units of milliequivalent, okay? And if you want to convert it to DKH, you multiply by 2.8. So I'll do a very quick. The alkalinity, the total alkalinity in the mid-ocean is between 6.8 to 7. If you go to the Red Sea, it's around 7.5 and 7 at the Pacific. Okay, the question is why the total alkalinity is not the same. Okay, and if you see here at this color scale, it actually measure, okay, the change in the carbonate ion. Okay, and why there is so much fluctuation between the Atlantic Ocean, where you have corals in the Caribbean, okay, in Western Africa, to other places like the Pacific or the Red Sea. And in both areas you have calcifying creature, but we still see significant change in alkalinity, especially in the inorganic carbon. And it's a very good question. And when you look at the alkalinity, okay, just to understand, alkalinity is the sum of the dissolved inorganic carbon, which is the bicarbonate, the carbonate, a little bit the CO2, and mainly the boric acid, borate, sulfate, phosphate, and silica. All of these components are responsible for the alkalinity. So you think, okay, some of these elements change, but sulfate and silicate are conservative, okay? And the boron, these are conservative elements because there aren't many creatures that consume this element. But the carbonate and the silicate and phosphate are consumed by some of the creatures that grow in the ocean, and they are responsible to fluctuation in alkalinity. And if you see, this area is in the border between the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. First, you can see the different shade. This is because there is different in salinities, okay? And because the density of these two oceans is different, there is a straight border. The other thing that you can see is that there is a lot of algae in this area. And as I told you, algae has the ability to consume bicarbonate in order to utilize it in the process of photosynthesis. Okay, it doesn't need just dissolved CO2. If there isn't enough dissolved CO2, they use an enzyme that called carbonic anhydrase, and they start to consume bicarbonate. Therefore, in areas with a lot of algae, we will see significant reduction in alkalinity. Okay? Brian? If there are any questions, you
Yes.
can stop me, okay? If I'm going too fast or if there are any questions, okay? You can
Okay.
hold me down, okay? I'll continue to run.
Okay, no problem. So
No
for those
problem.
who have just tuned in, if you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comment section, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook, and we will bring it up. If we will bring it up, and we'll have a Q&A shortly after your presentation round. So yeah,
I'll
just you
continue.
can continue. And yeah, if anybody has any questions at all, do feel free to just chime in the comment section. Also, if you're from overseas, do let us know so we can also share more things with you who if you're interested in following our club. Okay, Sharon, back to
I'll
you.
continue. Great.
Yeah.
So after we cover the basic demands to provide the basic demand for corals, and we found that they can grow in a stable condition of pH and salinity. I wanted to accelerate the growth, and as I told you, the major um, thing that coral needs are calcium and bicarbonate. Now we need to understand that in artificial environment, the proportion between the bioload and the water volume is significantly higher than in nature. What it means that the element consumption is much higher than our capabilities to replenish it. Not in a time scale of a day or an hour. I'm talking about microseconds where precipitation process occurs. Okay, so in almost in any moment inside the coral, there is a deficit of elements because precipitation is a continuous process and all the time calcium and carbonate are being consumed. So in the sea, okay, where uh, calcium and carbonate are stable in the environment, when you grow coral in sea, okay, this is the change in the omega, which is the amount of carbonate and calcium. You basically don't see over time any change in their concentration. Again, because the amount of bioload compared to the entire volume of the sea is huge. Okay, they cannot reduce calcium and carbonate. But in the aquarium, okay, what we see that over time, after 10 hours, if we start from the same omega, the same proportion of calcium and carbonate, the concentration is being reduced very fast in a period of 2 to 3 hours, and then it gradually consumed in less and less and less quantities. At this point, where the aragonate saturation state is around 2.5, the coral need to spend a lot of energy to be able to calcify. They need to pump more calcium to create more carbonate to increase the pH to higher levels in order to compensate. Because calcification occurs only at levels above 2.5. And if you remember, inside the calcification centers, the coral increased the aragonite to 10. So if they start from 5, it's easier for them. But if now the aragonite state of the seawater goes down to 2.5, it will consume a lot of energy for the corals to increase it to 10. Okay, and this is very important. And the conclusion which I managed to figure out by calcification process is when I artificially increase the aragonite saturation state to 14.8, which is with calcium concentration of 460 and alkalinity of around 12 or 13, I managed to gain much more skeleton, or the calcification rate was significantly higher than just in increasing just the calcium or just increasing the alkalinity, which gave me lower aragonitic saturation state. And I came to conclusion if I increase, which was very straightforward, if I increase the calcium and I increase the alkalinity in the same proportion, I'm getting a significant faster calcification rate. And at certain point, I continued to get growth, but it was at the same rate, okay, over a week, for over several weeks. Now, this is very nice experiment. How I was able to measure the rates. Okay, I can I could took the corals and weighed them on a weekly basis, but it stressed the corals, and at that point I wasn't able to measure exactly um, if it's the soft tissue that grow or the skeleton grow, or I had more algae that grow inside. So what I did, I use a fluorescentic dye, okay, which called calcine. And when you put the coral inside this fluorescentic dye, this dye bond itself to calcium, okay? And when it bonds itself to calcium, you can see the saturation of the fluorescentic pigment inside the new skeleton. And what I did, I grew the corals and I just put them under fluorescentic binocular, which enables me to see the change in the fluorescentic saturation of the skeleton. And I was able to measure how fast, okay, and how fast and how much more fluorescentic activity I gained in each condition. And definitely, when I increased both calcium and alkalinity, the fluorescentic reaction was much, much faster, okay? And the rate that these elements enter to the skeleton were also much faster, okay? So I came to conclusion that growing, in order to accelerate coral growth, okay, I need to provide much higher calcium and alkalinity than natural seawater. Now, people started to ask me, okay, but how is it possible? Because today, if coral grow today in their natural condition, okay, if higher concentration are much better, okay, the corals should eventually disappear. And our conclusion today, it's maybe we are looking now at the end of the period of the corals, okay, because corals arrive in evolution 200 million years ago, okay? This area, when the seawater where the sea was an Aragonitic sea. Aragonitic sea means that a lot of calcium, a lot of magnesium, high alkalinity. They arrived, and over the years, the ocean changed between Aragonitic to calcitic seas with lower calcium and lower magnesium and low alkalinity, and it increased today, and it started to decrease. So all the effect of global warming and ocean acidification in a geological time scale, this is events that happened throughout the geological time scale many times. Okay, and this is part of the cycle that our Earth is going throughout the last 4 billion years. However, maybe what we see now, the damage to the coral reef are actually the end of our this modern coral period. Okay, and maybe only when the sea water condition will return back to the condition 200 million years ago, where calcium was about 800 milligram per liter and alkalinity was around 18 DKH, they will start to prosper again in much significant quantities. Now, I remind you that there is all the time a struggle between the energetic demand for the coral to survive. Does he need to spend more energy just to keep himself in good pH inside the tissue if the pH of the seawater are going down? Okay. Can he spend more energy to grow itself or even to increase the pH inside the calcification center? Okay. So if the condition were better, it would be much easier for them to grow. And there are evidence that at this period, coral calcification, okay, was almost 40% faster than what we see today. Okay, so the conclusion is that first of all, that there isn't one definition for natural seawater or what we need to aim for. The second, okay, we know that in artificial environment, the rate of consumption is much higher than our rate of replenishment. And in order to be in a positive condition, we might need to provide higher concentration of the element just to prevent any limiting factors. We know that corals grow significantly better at higher omega levels, which mean higher calcium, higher carbonate than natural seawater. We need to increase them from 5 to 10. It would be much easier for the corals. We know that they need precise proportion between calcium carbonate, magnesium, and strontium in order to create aragonite. Yes?
Okay, Ram,
Yes?
Sharon, I'm going to stop you here for a while. We have a
Okay.
question from JZ Reeves. I think it's quite relatable to what you're asking. So,
Yeah.
JZ Reeves, he's asking, is this finding is conclusive, say, with the increment of alkalinity and calcium, with all other parameters such as lighting, or nitrate and phosphate being status quo? This will contribute to higher growth rate?
Yes, but you need to compensate not with light, but to compensate with nutrient. You need enough nitrogen and phosphorus to support the zooxanthellae, okay, and in order to provide enough energy. If you just provide high calcium and high alkalinity, but the nutrients level will be low, okay, the zooxanthellae will not be able to provide the amount of carbohydrate, which is the energy fuel for the pumps to increase the pH. So basically, what will happen that you'll put the coral in less energetic conditions. Okay,
Okay. So, JZ Reeves, I hope that answers your question. Okay, Sharon, we can continue.
continue. Okay, so just to bring back to the Red Sea development, after I finished this part, I came with the two salt formulas, which basically what the major difference is the aragonite saturation state. Okay, I increased in Coral Pro both the alkalinity and the calcium and the magnesium. Okay, and even in the Red Sea salt, the parameters are much higher than natural seawater, okay? Because in both conditions, I provide the coral with higher omega, higher saturation state. It put the coral in better energetic position. Now, I just put the sulfur here in the same color. The reason I wasn't able to increase the sulfate proportionally, okay, it's because that at a higher concentration, gypsum, okay, will start to form, okay, and I wanted to prevent it. This is why the sulfur is the same in both formulas. Okay, all the other elements are proportionally to the calcium, which I'll explain you soon why. Now, I spoke a little bit about aragonite and calcite, which is very important to understand. Corals, most of the corals precipitate aragonite. Aragonite is much stronger crystal than calcite. Okay, the scale for structure strength called MOSH, and aragonite has number 9. Sorry, calcite has MOSH number of 9, while aragonite is 21. So aragonite is much stronger. And as I told you, coral build the skeleton in order to spread themselves in 3 dimension in the water column. So the stronger the structure, okay, the stronger the colony will be. What There are two elements that responsible for the formation of calcite and aragonite, or prefer the formation of aragonite on calcite. The first one is magnesium. It's very important to keep magnesium to calcium ratio. This is in mole per mole, but it means at least 3 times the concentration of calcium should be the concentration of magnesium in order to guarantee the formation of aragonite crystal. If we will have only high calcium and high carbonate, but the magnesium will be low, the crystal that will be precipitated inside the calcification center will be calcite. Strontium also have the same role, okay, enhancing the formation of aragonite. This is why they need to be in the same proportion. This is why we recommend to dose calcium together with strontium and also with barium and magnesium all the time in direct proportion. Because if you don't dose them in the same proportion, eventually calcite will start to be precipitate. Now, sulfate, magnesium, strontium, and barium are the precursor. Okay, these are the first crystals that start to form in the calcifying center, and only later calcium carbonate start to build itself. So it's essential to provide all of these elements together with calcium carbonate. Just a quick brief, what's happened when the proportion are not, you don't have good proportion between calcium carbonate and magnesium. If calcium carbonate and magnesium are in lower concentration, the process of skeletogenesis, of skeleton formation, will be reduced significantly. Why? Because the omega will be low. If you just increase the calcium, the carbonate, but you don't provide enough magnesium, first of all, the first thing that will happen, that the calcium and carbonate will precipitate immediately, and you'll get calcite, or basically you'll get a natural forming amorphous calcite, and you'll get a milky water. The second thing will be that the crystals that the coral will form will be calcite and not aragonite. What's happened if you increase both magnesium and carbonate but not the calcium? You will have significant shift in pH. Okay, the pH of the system will increase significantly. Uh, if you have high calcium and high magnesium but low carbonate, you'll get a very low pH, and it would be difficult for the system to compensate. Okay, more CO2 will enter from the atmosphere into the water to start to compensate with the carbonate, and it will reduce the pH. Okay, if you have only high magnesium, it can cause magnesium toxicity, and usually we see them as white spot on SPS corals. It's like a burn signs. And if everything is in proportion, you get a very healthy growth. Okay? Now, after we manage to adjust and we can control the major elements, the calcium, magnesium, and carbonate, I started to look into the energetic budget. Okay, I told you that the zooxanthellae provide most of the energy, and I saw that I need to provide nutrient in order to gain maximum calcification. And in one of the first experiments was to grow corals in different nitrate levels. And as you can see in this graph, I growed bird nest and Acropora and Montipora digitata. And as you can see that we got the maximum growth rate at nitrate concentration of 1 ppm, okay? Between 0 to 5 to 1. And at lower concentration, the calcification was reduced, and at higher concentration, calcification was reduced. Now, I know that today many people grow their corals at higher nitrate levels, but you need to understand when you grow corals at higher nutrients levels, you increase the zooxanthellae population. If you do that, remember, all the time remember that the zooxanthellae also consume bicarbonate. So if you increase the nitrate, you must increase the alkalinity, okay? Or be able to compensate the alkalinity all the time. Because in this experiment, when I kept the alkalinity the same between all the experiment, I started to see that at higher concentration, there was a reduction in calcification rate because the alkalinity dropped too fast. And when you see a drop in alkalinity, but you can't measure the same proportion in the weight of the coral, so the alkalinity was not converted from carbonate in the water to calcium carbonate in the skeleton. So it went to photosynthetic activity and production of carbohydrates and not skeleton. Therefore, higher nitrate and higher phosphate requires higher alkalinity levels. Now, at that point, when I was able to um, see how can I control both growth rate and coloration by playing with the zooxanthella, I thought that this would be the optimal program. If you want to accelerate growth, increase the zooxanthella population, okay? But the price that you pay for that is that the coral will become much darker, get much brownish coloration, which mask the pigments. And if you want more coloration, I had to reduce the amount of zooxanthella, but the price is that I have to reduce the calcification rate. So basically what we need to do is to choose where to be on this graph if we want to accelerate the growth or accelerate the coloration without damaging the coral or reducing its energetic demands too much. Okay, and as I wrote down, the keys: encourage each process separately and in a minimal energetic waste. Okay, we do it by controlling the nutrient. Now I'll talk a little bit about the development of the NOPOX, which is part of the RCP. Okay, we know today that there are three methods for nutrient control. First one is assimilation, is the conversion of nitrogen and phosphate into tissue. This is what basically algae does, and some of the bacteria. Okay, they convert nitrogen and phosphate to grow their bodies. There is an absorption by resins, phosphate remover, zeolites, and there is the process of dissimilation, okay, which is the natural way of biological activity in anoxic conditions, okay. What happens in the dissimilation process? Nitrate is reduced to nitrogen, okay, by uh, 10 strains of Pseudomonas bacteria, okay. The nitrogen is used, okay, as electron receptor. It provides the oxygen in anoxic condition. It's a 7-stage process, okay, and each stage of conversion between nitrate to nitrite to nitrogen monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, okay, and eventually to nitrogen gas requires specific cofactor. It's an element and precise amount of carbon source to feed the process. If you don't provide all the trace element or you don't provide the proper carbon source, you can break the process in any of the stages, and it can cause an increase in NO2. It increase, sometimes it is converted back to ammonia, okay, or ammonium ion, or nitric monoxide or nitric dioxide, which are toxic. And we don't have in the home aquarium, we don't have any tool to measure these accumulation of these toxic compounds. This is why it is important, if you provide carbon source, is to provide also all the trace elements to support a complete denitrification process. For the phosphate, by providing proper carbon source, we enhance the activity of phosphate harboring bacteria. This is a dual process that occurs in the aerobic condition and then in the anoxic condition, where these bacteria consume the orthophosphate, the PO4, and they develop large chain of polyphosphate. What happens when they start to accumulate this phosphate or these lipids? It's like oil, and then these bacteria are float in the water column, okay, and then these bacteria need to be exported out by a protein skimmer. Okay, so in the phosphate removing process, we need to encourage the growth of biomass and export it out of the system. Now, here is a table that compare different types of nutrient control, which the NOPOX compare to biopellets, phosphate remover, and refugee. Um, so the benefits of NOPOX, first of all, this is a complete solution. It provides all the trace elements that support complete denitrification, and it also provides the carbon source to enhance PHB activity. So they consume the phosphate, create polyphosphate, move to the water column, then exported by the protein skimmer. So it's a complete nitrate reduction. It's a complete PO4 removal. It is a controllable process. By changing the quantities of NOPOX or the amount of carbon source, you can control the level of nitrate and phosphate you want to keep in your system. You want to go to zero, you increase the NOPOX. You want to keep it at 0.25 or 0.02 phosphate, you play with the carbon source. If you use the biopellets, okay, biopellets provide carbon source, but it provides it in an aerobic condition. So the phosphate reduction is not complete, okay, and it's much difficult to control it because the only way to control it was by playing with the water flow, okay, and you don't have all the trace element to support complete denitrification. Phosphate remover are excellent exporting out phosphate from the system. However, it's not controllable because at the beginning, when the phosphate remover is not saturated, it consumes a lot of phosphate, and the fluctuation in phosphate levels are very fast and can be very aggressive. And we can see it as a start of rapid tissue necrosis from the bottom of the tissues if we play with if we change the phosphate too fast. Okay, and over time, the phosphate remover becomes saturated, and then phosphates start to increase, and then we put again new phosphate remover, and again there is a drop in phosphate. So it's not so controllable method. And refugim is very easy to use. It's the process of assimilation. So we all the time take the algae out of the system, which is fine. However, remember that algae consume a lot of trace element. uh, 1 gram of algae dry weight consumes 70 times, 70 times more trace element than the same wet amount of coral. So if you grow a refugee, remember that it consumes most of the element and it also consumes a lot of alkalinity. So if you use refugee and you see significant reduction in alkalinity, and you dose all your elements according to alkalinity, you might pump the refugee and not the corals. Okay? So you need to remember. Um, Another thing I want to talk about is a little bit about probiotic. Okay, this is also a very new trend, providing all the time bacteria to the system. Just to give you the definition, probiotic are live microorganisms that consume nutrients. Usually, the only bacteria that are available in the industry that we can provide are bacillus bacteria. They know how to consume phosphate and nitrate very well, okay? And we need to understand that in order for them to grow well and prosperous, we need to provide them with prebiotic, which is the food. This is basically what NOPOX is doing, but instead of feeding bacillus that are not natural to the marine environment, we provide the prebiotic for the natural occurring bacteria, the nitrifiers and the PHB bacteria. And I will show you what happened, okay, when you use prebiotic, okay. I'll show you first in the graph This is when you add NOPOX. When you start to add NOPOX, you see fine reduction in both ammonia and nitrate and phosphate. Okay, and you can control it over time. Okay, if you want to increase a little bit the levels, reduce the amount of NOPOX, and you'll see an increase in nitrate and phosphate. When you use probiotic, and if you do it, let's say, on a weekly basis, there is a very fast reduction in nutrient, then you measure the zero. But eventually, because bacillus bacteria are not natural to the marine environment, the population collapses. When it collapses, it returns back some of the phosphate and the nitrate. Then you add again another dose of probiotic. It reduces again the nutrient and goes on and goes on. So you start to have fluctuation in phosphate and nitrate. Okay, if I summarize, okay, the benefits of the probiotic of NOPOX, that first of all, that you have a progressive reduction. Okay, it enables the coral very smooth and an adjustment to changes in the environment. It reduces both nitrate and phosphate in a balanced condition because some of the phosphate is consumed by the denitrifying bacteria. Okay, it's stable. It prevents the fluctuation. You can adjust it by the dosage. Okay, it provides all the trace elements to guarantee a complete denitrification. And one of the last things that's important when using NOPOX, it prevents the formation of hydrogen sulfide. Now, the denitrifying bacteria, when nitrate becomes zero, they start to convert sulfate to hydrogen sulfate. They start to take the oxygen from the sulfate, which is SO4, and take all the oxygen like they take from the nitrate, and hydrogen sulfate start to be produced in the deeper anoxic layers, and the anoxic layers start to become anaerobic. And in anaerobic condition, a lot of bad components start to being produced, like hydrogen sulfide and methane. Okay?
Okay, Sharon,
Yes?
Brian here. So we're running out of time.
Okay.
Maybe we just do a quick. I mean, if you could do a quick wrap up, I could give you another 5 more minutes.
Now, yes, I'll finish with the final stage, okay? And give me
Okay.
5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. You
Sorry it
can
took
take
me
5 to 10 minutes.
a
Fine.
lot of time, okay?
Okay.
So the last stage was the formation of pigments, okay? We can see that there are different kinds of chromoprotein inside the corals. When we see the brown shade is basically because of the zooxanthella. We also have two types of pigments, which is the green fluorescent protein and the red fluorescent protein. And we have the other polypyrene chromoproteins, which provide the pink, the purple, and the blue colors. Now, as I told you, coral can synthesize all the amino acids, but in order to stimulate the formation of these pigments, the coral need to sense the UVA and UVB. Okay, when they see when the tissue start to absorb this wavelength, okay, and when we reduce the zooxanthella, it stimulates the coral to synthesize the chromoproteins. They, as I told you, they take the carbohydrates from the photosynthetic activity, they convert it to amino acids, which are the building blocks of the protein, and together with specific trace element, they produce all the pigments. Now, how do I define which trace element are being used? What I did in 2010, I started to analyze the coral soft tissue with an ICP. Okay, I had at that time I had all ICP OES and ICP MS in my lab, and I found out that coral utilize only 36 elements from the entire periodic table, all corals. Okay, so there's a lot of trace elements that the coral do not use that are in seawater. I managed to break them into 5 groups. The major elements for calcification, which are calcium, strontium, barium, carbonate, and magnesium for the skeleton, and the rest of the 31 minor and trace elements, which are also divided into 4 groups. All the halogens that responsible also for pink coloration, potassium, which sits by itself, the light metals, which are iron, manganese, cobalt, chrome, and vanadium, and all the trace elements. Why I divided them into 4 groups? Because they are have synergistic effect between them, and you need to dose them in exact proportion to between each other and calcium. And this is the last thing. Um, I wanted to show you that today many hobbyists use ICP, okay, to run tests and measure all the trace element. Now I'll do it quickly. This is a comparison between the detection limit of ICP OES and ICP MS. And all the elements that are in green and yellow are capable to be measured properly in ICP-OS in the concentration that are found in seawater or near seawater. Okay, so you see that a lot of elements that you do get results like aluminum, silicon, scandium, titanium, chrome, manganese, iron, all of them, you actually can't measure them precisely with an ICP-OS. And basically, when you get the measurement, which in microgram, the minimum detection limit for ICP-OS is between 1 to 10, okay? And in order to get very good results, you need a better equipment. What we found that all the elements, all the 36 elements, are in direct proportion to calcium, okay? And if you know the calcium consumption, you can dose exactly all the 36 trace elements, and this is why you don't need the ICP test. Okay, Brian, I think I'll finish here and I'll give time to question. Okay, Brian?
Okay. So thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, it took me a lot of time.
No worries. No
Okay,
worries. I think everybody has so many questions, and you know what? I'm going to bring up some of the questions that are related to your current presentation. Let me
okay,
read it for you first. So, Sharon, thank you so much for your sharing. Even I personally learned a lot, and I think a lot of people here also have questions. So, I'm
yes,
going to start with one of the most simple questions that we have here. So, we have Charles Chu, PC. Hi, Ram. Why don't we increase overall salinity instead of calcium and pH only?
okay, I'll extend. This is an excellent question. You remember that I told you that there are ion pumps, okay, in the coral soft tissue, that they are responsible to move ions in and out of the calcifying center. If we increase the salinity, we significantly increase the amount of sodium and chloride in this area, okay? And it would be much more difficult for the coral to pump out these elements. So it will be um, energetically, it will consume more energy to move the sodium and chloride rather to spend it on taking the proton out. We see that at 35 PSU, we get the optimal calcification rate for corals.
Okay, so Charles, I hope that answers your question. We have one question, again, back to JZ Reeves, because it's quite related to your
Oh.
presentation. Would be the cause of a hobbyist getting cyanobacteria upon usage of NOPOX due to a faster depletion of NO3 versus phosphate?
Yes. Basically, we see cyanobacteria outbreak when nitrate goes to 0 level and we still have phosphate in the system. Cyanobacteria is one of the strongest organisms in nature, and the reason for that is because it can fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. So it consumes the nitrogen not in the source of nitrate or ammonium. It takes the nitrogen directly from the atmosphere. The reason that we see outbreak of cyanobacteria when using NOPOX, especially in new aquarium or aquarium that are newly introduced to NOPOX, is that one of the benefits of NOPOX when it encourage the PHB bacteria, it stripes out the phosphate that is bound to the rocks, to the aragonite. Many live rocks and sediments harbors a lot of phosphate. So during the 3 or 4 months when using Nopox, you'll start to see that there is a delay in phosphate reduction, but it's not a delay, it's stripping out the phosphate from the carbonate substrate or the rocks. And you'll see over time, for example, if you use natural live rocks, that the color is changing from dark brown to light gray. This telling you that the phosphate that was clogged in the rocks is being released. During that period, until you strip out all the phosphate from the system, you might have cyanobacteria outbreaks. Okay, but continue with the NOPOX, increase the dosage, and you'll eventually remove the cyanobacteria also.
Okay, we have a question from Jia En. So, why does high alkalinity millipora growth reduce drastically after a few weeks? Is there a reason
Why
why?
does high alkalinity growth reduce drastically?
Okay,
In
let
my
me rephrase that.
presentation, it's not
Let me.
reduced, it was stable, I think. The graph show you, okay, that it increased at the beginning to the optimal growth rate, and then it's stable. So the colony grow at the same rate, okay? Because there are other factors due to currents and the light compared to the size of the colony. There were other factors. Okay, but I don't think that there was a reduction in not in the omega experiment. In the nitrate experiment, there was a reduction at higher nitrate that relates to alkalinity.
Okay. Now we're gonna go for a question about the. Okay, so I have some questions that were prepared before this program. So I'm gonna share them with you as well. So the
Okay.
first question I have is actually about this new product that you have,
Yes,
which
yes,
is the Coral induction
yes,
bar, the Deep X. So
Depex.
can you tell us a little bit more about
Yes,
this new product that you have?
absolutely. So, as you know, because the entire coral trade has changed during the last 2 3 years, we started to see here in Israel that many corals that arrived from Australia, this is what we were able to get here in Israel, well, with significant higher amount of hitchhikers or coral parasites. Now, today there are known to the science, to the coral scientific community, around 6,000 invertebrates, okay, that harbor coral colony. Now, we don't know if some of them are parasitic or they have any relationship, and we decided to find something that will remove most of them. And I focused on three major parasites. One is the acropora-eating flatworm. The second was the red bug, and the Montipora nudibranch. Okay, because these are the parasites that are suffering the most. And I used many kinds of dips in the past. Some of them were halogen based, like iodine and bromine salt. I use different type of essential oil. I use the I don't remember the name, the American pesticide from Bayer. I will remember the name in a few minutes. I use Dettol. I use different types of disinfecting agent. And eventually, I was looking for a blend of essential oil that will be almost a target treatment against these three parasites that I mentioned before. And I started to blend many essential oils that I was able to get from natural plants here in Israel and some from abroad. And I came to the mixture of these three essential oils, which gave um, the optimal condition of concentration against treatment time and maximum aggressiveness against these three parasites. And this is the blend. And what we found more interestingly, that for a copper eating flatworm, it reduced, it didn't prevent the the eggs from hatching out, but it significantly reduced the number of eggs that hatched eventually. So I think that there is these essential oils were also able to penetrate into the eggs of the accopulating platform and the nudibranch. And another thing for the red bugs, this was the only blend that actually repelled the red bugs, and you saw them jumping out of the coral.
Okay. So I hope that answers a lot of your questions because this
Yes,
is a relatively new product in the market,
yes,
and it's something that I've also been trying. So DipX is pretty good, and it's available at most of your LFS right now. Well, we also have a lot of questions about Ophelia, actually.
yes.
Sharon, actually, every single day we get questions on the forums about caring for euphyllias. We ask, why do they bill out? Why do they have brown jelly disease?
Yes.
So we have a question here to start off, maybe some questions about euphilia. Somebody asked, how can the Reef Care program help or prevent euphilia coral bailout? This is
Okay.
something that has been quite common recently, especially. So maybe you could shed some light on euphilia bailout as well.
Okay, I'll try to answer. And as you already said, the major cause for the bailout is what we eventually see as brown jelly, is the infection of bacterial disease, especially from the Pseudomonas species of bacteria. Unfortunately, I think that the reason that Ophelia suffered the most from this bailout is the physiological structure of the Ophelia, the ratio between the soft tissue and the skeleton. Where the polyp is budding out from the skeleton, we see the walls, which called the teca walls. These are the walls that are very sharp, and very slight damage to the tissue in this area significantly enhance the accumulation of bacteria. Now, we need to understand that all these bacteria, the Pseudomonas and Neuromonas and Vibrio, they are opportunistic bacteria. So they just look for the chance where the tissue itself is torn apart, even the slight damage, and they start to accumulate. Now, I don't think that the RCP uh, as itself will prevent bailout, but if you follow any program that gives a stable condition, and again, if you give the basic stability, start with salinity and pH, then calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium without fluctuation, the coral can spend more energy in growth and in immune system, for example, and get over disease rather than a specific product that can help it. I can say that when the halogen levels are low, the bromine, the iodine, and the fluorine are at low concentration, you have less oxidizing agent in the system, and basically you have less natural disinfectors. So keep these elements at proper concentration. This can help.
Okay, okay. So I hope that answers the questions for most of you euphyllia lovers like myself. So the physiology of the whole euphyllia coral, just to
Yeah.
translate, just to repeat, it's actually quite sensitive, right? It's
Yes.
very easy to get damaged and to encourage bacterial growth.
Yes.
So because of factors like this, we actually have to be quite careful. While the Reef program doesn't directly help or treat the bacterial disease, what it actually helps to do is to keep your water into a very stable condition, which of course reduces the chances of this bacteria from growing or from your corals from being weak and easily damaged from any cause at all. So
Yes.
is that what? Yeah.
Yes. Now, Deepex, the essential oils of Deepex has some antibacterial activity. So if you start to see sign of brown jelly, you can dip the coral in Deepex. If you are capable of taking it out, okay, it has some antimicrobial activity like antibiotic, but natural antibiotic. Okay, but never put it direct in the aquarium. Always treat outside. Okay?
Mm. Okay, so for Ophelia lovers, you might want to consider getting a quarantine tank for
Yes.
your very precious Euphelias who have some signs of brown jelly. And DipX is something that right now, from the chief scientist himself, is something that will help with that condition. But of course, as recommended to be treated outside of your display tank
Of
because
course.
you never know, brown jelly spreads, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so DipX is something that will help. So thank you so much for your answer. And we also have this question. Okay, we can try this question that just came in. You mentioned that no pox will encourage the growth of prebiotic and probiotic bacteria. Will it, on the other hand, also encourage the growth of brown jelly disease?
No, because Pseudomonas and Aeromonas, all these opportunistic bacteria grow, they have hemolytic enzymes. They break down the tissue of their host animals, okay? So they don't consume carbon source from the surrounding water. They don't need it.
Okay. Well, this is a general question, and I think it's something that a lot of us reefers have asked ourselves at some point of time. This is from Shanmuga. As reefers, we are caught between helping to protect the reef sea life and also contribute to the destruction of some. What are your thoughts, Ron?
Okay. This is a very good and fair question, and I'll choose the the answer that we actually help contributing to the health of the system because in and this is interesting because we had a lecture with a composium of few professors here in Israel that came to conclusion that the industry, the hobby industry, will eventually we will be the gene bank of the next future of corals because in most universities around the world that do study corals physiology, they don't know how to keep the corals. They have a lot of knowledge about specific processes, but they don't know how to grow the corals for an extended period of time. All the propagation that we see today in our industry, every one of us know how to cut frags, how to grow coral from frags. Now we can do it even for LPS. So I think that the the future of coral reefs will be definitely supported by our industry. Okay, and if we'll see more and more hobbyists buying from aquaculture facilities and promoting these facilities, okay, it will definitely keep the natural system, and then we can restore back some of the coral reef.
Okay, so I really like that answer, and I agree with you, Sharon, that even as our seas are facing global warming, and the conditions in the seas are not getting so suitable for a lot of corals, and they're being extinct. Our collections actually become a gene pool. We do have
Absolutely.
it, right? We have it, and we're actually into aquaculturing as well. A lot of us are culturing the corals themselves. Some of us treat it as a challenge. Some of us are treating it as something that we can learn to take care of our corals more. And of course, with the knowledge and the care of these oceans, it makes most of us more aware that we
Absolutely.
need to care, and that all these corals, they are so sensitive. A lot of us are even surprised that why are corals not even extinct yet.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
having that knowledge of all these corals is something that this education is something that's actually pushing us a step actually closer to conserving these corals. So
Definitely.
yeah, I definitely agree with your answer. Okay, so I have another question that's related to your RedSea program as well. So okay, I have a similar question that's been given to me earlier. So, with regards to your trace elements, right? There is, let me see. Okay, so let's say, for example, we do an ICP test, right? And then we find that some trace elements are in a good range, and but some are really low or even zero. Using the RedSea ABCD element products, which has several elements combined into each bottle, what is the best way to bring everything back to balance
Okay. First
without
of all,
overdosing?
okay. First of all, I hope that during this lecture, uh, even if it was for a very brief, please. I know that ICP for most of us seems like the most precise method to measure. Okay, but um, after 13 years of running both ICP OES, which is the instrument the most companies that provide ICP analysis use, and running both ICP MS, which is a mass spectrometer that measures to able measure trace elements, it's the degree of mistake could be huge if you don't know how to run the process and you don't know how to run uh, the analysis properly. You might get very false reading. So first of all, I want to tell you something. Don't run after the numbers. Okay, each one of you have the one that have experience, and you see that the conditions are well and the corals looks very well. Okay, it doesn't say if the numbers are not in the levels that they should be, there is a problem. Look first on the corals. Now second, all the trace element that gives you false reading, all the numbers that are below 5 microgram, you should take them in. I don't want to be suspicious about the results, but the mistake, it could be up to 100%. Okay, now to see just one element uh, running out of the standards level also can also light a red bulb, because as I told you, most of the elements work in synergistic effect. For example, if you see that iron drop to zero levels and manganese stay in the proper condition, okay, you should understand that this is a false reading of the iron, because they will go together down. It's the same with calcium and strontium, for example, or iodine, bromine, and chlorine. So if you see that there is a group of elements that run out of the range, that the acceptable range, the best thing to do is to do good water change. Let's say 50% with good quality salt, and adjust the system. Okay, do a restart, do a one or two water changes with a good quality salt. Most of the salt brand, I think, will provide you with a balanced condition, and then you can start all over. The second thing is to work with a program that makes sense in supplementing. I don't want to say which program is better than the other. You will choose it by yourself, but there is a tendency to run after the numbers. Okay, and corals are much more tolerable to some of the elements that you might see out of range. Okay, now concerning metals, another thing, if you see an elevated levels of metals, it doesn't say that they are in the toxic form. Most of these metals will be in an oxidized form, which means that they cannot penetrate to the tissue and cannot harm the corals. Okay? So again, you need to understand a little bit the chemistry before you become stressed and start to do I don't know, drastic effect and do uh, go and buy other trace element and start to pump your aquarium with a lot of trace element. The other thing is that there are a lot of so-called metal absorbers, specific metal absorbers. Um, if there was a specific metal absorber in our industry, okay, so the manufacturer of this metal absorber is not in the right industry, okay? You can't have a specific copper remover or specific um, vanadium remover. All of these resins that remove metals remove bulk of elements, okay? If you have problem, do a big water change, and that's it. Okay.
Okay, so I think I have time for one last question. A lot of people have asked us this as well. What do you think about old tank syndrome? What do you think causes old tank syndrome? Is it something that's a real thing, or is it just happens to most tanks after a while?
I must say that I think that old tank syndrome is something that relates more to equipment and supplements that were more common 10 or 15 years ago. With today knowledge and today industry, which uh, keep more attention to the quality of the metal parts and the plastic parts and the supplement, you see less and less syndrome of old tank. This is my experience. I must say that I never suffered from an old tank syndrome. Again, there might be accumulation of as much as I know, many people realize the old tank syndrome in accumulation of trace elements, okay, in the aquarium. I think it's maybe an accumulation of organic materials. There's a lot of organic substances that can accumulate, and we even can't measure them because we don't know what to look for. So if you are doing a regular water change, and if you do a very good maintenance with activate carbon and protein skimmer, um, I don't think that you'll suffer from an old tank syndrome. Uh, it might be one of the reasons that can maybe enhance such a syndrome is using deep sand bed. Okay, in a deep sand bed, you might get over time anaerobic conditions. Okay, and in anaerobic condition, it's not anoxic, it's anaerobic when you don't have oxygen at all. In such condition, you might start to get hydrogen sulfide and methane production. This relies or relates to old tank syndrome, and this could be a reason of a collapse of old aquariums. Okay.
Okay, so thank you so much, Sharon. So,
No problem.
I've learned a lot. I think that's the last question for today. Sharon, thank you so much for coming
Thank
here with
you.
us. We learned a lot, especially about the Reef Care program and coloring. And I think a lot of people took away from Maslow's hierarchy triangle, where we really know what's the basic survival all the way to getting the colors. So thank you so much for your sharing. A lot of us has learned a lot. Definitely, even to tomorrow, I think some of us are definitely gonna get Dip X, especially to kill brown jelly. I think that's gonna happen tomorrow. So thank you so much for your time, and
No
we
problem.
hope to have you up again. Yeah, I'm sure all of us, we all hope to have another session with you, probably about another topic. So yeah, I hope we have a chance to have another session with you again.
Great.
So Sharon,
Thank you.
any last words for us before
Yes, of
we
course. First
the
of all,
show?
again, thank you for the opportunity, for the time. I don't have a lot of chances to talk to hobbyists and, uh, you know, actually demonstrate how I developed the RCP. So I truly appreciate it. I truly appreciate the time. This, I know it's Sunday evening and all of you have dinners, and thanks a lot. I wish you all Merry Christmas. I see the tree for the one who's celebrating it, and for the rest, Happy New Year if we won't talk, and good health for every one of us. And hopefully, I'll get another opportunity to talk to you guys.
Yes, we also hope that it can happen very soon. Especially if you have new products to introduce to us, we are more than excited. There's a question here asking about whether you have products for non-photosynthetic corals, but let's leave that for another time. So,
Reef energy, reef energy.
yeah, oh, Reef Energy. Okay, so
Yes,
we're gonna end our session with you here. I'm gonna conduct a lucky draw, but thank you so much, Sharon, and I
no
hope to see
problem.
you very soon. Thank you,
Cheers.
Sharon.
Bye bye.
Cheers. So hi guys, again I'm Brian from SRC. That was an amazing session with Sharon, and before we end, of course, we promised to have a lucky draw with you. Let's have the lucky draw up on screen. You need to switch it to the screen. Okay, waiting for it to go to the screen. Now, if you have your questions and you have questions that are unanswered, do write it. Just write it down in the comments, and if we can, we're going to send the questions over to Sharon, or we'll get one of our community members to also help answer those questions for you. I know Ophelia is a very, very big thing now. A lot of people are asking questions. Why is my Ophelia dying? Why is my torch coral bailing out? Why is it melting? One day it's here, one day it's not. So, if you have any questions that weren't answered during the program, you can feel free to write it in the comments, and we'll try our best to give you answers from Sharon or from one of the community members. Okay, I have the lucky draw up right now, so I'm going to bring up the screen. Okay, we're using a program. I hope you can't really see. Okay, so let's spin the wheel for the prizes. Yeah, okay. What are we giving away for this?
Who's the energy in the bags?
Okay.
All three. All five prizes is the same.
5 prizes will be the same, yeah? Okay, so we have 5. Okay, so Mr. Borens, congratulations. You have won yourself a set of RedSea products. We're going to have 5 winners, so all the best. Next person, Borens. And the next person is Hackers. Okay, Hackers, congratulations. You have won yourself some RedSea products. They're all awesome products that you can definitely use. DipX is one of them. Okay, next person is Sunny130Y. Okay, congratulations, Sunny. You have won yourself also the same package of RedSea products. Okay, next person. 2 more to go, so stay tuned. And it is none other than NCHLS. Okay, congratulations. And the last person and it is Extraster. So congratulations to our winners. We will contact you as to how to receive your prizes. So we've come to the end. We've come to the end of our live session. And again, thank you, Sharon, all the way from Israel. He's the RedSea's chief scientist. Thank you for his wonderful sharing. I hope all of you out there has enjoyed the session with him. If you're interested or if you're keen to have more programs like this, we're going to try to put it more regularly. But if you're interested, do let us know in the comment sections as well. Or you can write a message to us saying that you enjoyed the session today. And also, we have a feedback inquiry form that is going to be posted in the comment section. Do help us to fill it in as well, so we can try to arrange more good programs like with Sharon for you as well. So, we hope you can have 5 minutes of time just to fill out the survey form. And so we can really try to make things a bit more interesting for you in the next few programs. Also, we're going to give away t-shirts for those of you who participate in the survey. Whoever is given, is a lucky draw as well? Oh, so as long as you participate in the survey, in the survey, we're going to randomly give out some t-shirts. Oh, 20 t-shirts. Yeah. Okay. So we hope you enjoy yourself tonight. You can continue. Have a wonderful Sunday with your family. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. And I hope to see you again. Merry Christmas from us at SRC. And this is Brian signing out.